I knew the second I saw Patricia Hendricks marching across my front lawn with that look on her face that my life was about to become a living nightmare. My name is Carter Gallagher, and I run a small telecommunications company called Summit Wireless out of my property in Pine Ridge, Colorado. It's a beautiful place, nestled in the foothills about 40 miles west of Denver, where the air is crisp and the views are spectacular. I bought my 5-acre lot here 7 years ago specifically because it was outside the main subdivision boundaries, or so I thought. The property came with an easement that granted access to the local water treatment facility, a small operation that serviced about 200 homes in the area. The previous owner had built it back in the 80s when he ran a small manufacturing plant on the land. When I bought the place, the facility was still operational, maintained by the county, and my property served as the main access route. I had invested nearly everything I had into building my business. The communications tower on my land was essential to my operations. It provided internet and cellular service to rural communities that the big companies ignored. I had all the proper permits, the Federal Communications Commission licenses, and the county had signed off on everything. The tower was 150 feet tall, painted in alternating red and white bands per FAA regulations, with appropriate lighting for aircraft safety. It was professional, legal, and absolutely necessary for my livelihood. Patricia was the president of the Pine Ridge HOA, and she had been trying to find ways to extend the association's jurisdiction over my property for the past 2 years. She was one of those women who wore her authority like a crown, with her perfectly highlighted blonde hair always styled in the same helmet like Bob, her designer athleisure wear, and her tendency to hold her phone up like she was always 1 second away from calling either her lawyer or the police. "Carter Gallagher," she called out as she approached, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "We need to talk about that monstrosity you've erected on your property." I was working on my truck in the driveway, changing the oil, and I didn't bother getting up immediately. I finished tightening the drain plug before I wiped my hands on a rag and stood to face her. "Good morning to you too, Patricia," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "What can I do for you?" "That tower," she said, pointing at my communication structure like it was a personal insult. "It's an eyesore, and it's bringing down property values for the entire community." "It's on my property, Patricia. Private property that isn't part of the HOA," her lips pressed into a thin line. "That's where you're wrong. We've had our lawyers review the plat maps, and it turns out that a recent survey shows your property line is actually 15 feet further east than originally recorded. That puts your tower within HOA jurisdiction." I felt my stomach drop, but I kept my expression carefully neutral. "That's interesting, because I had my own survey done when I bought this place. Professional surveyor licensed by the state. Everything was clear." "Well, surveys can be wrong," she said with a shrug that was anything but casual. "We're having a special HOA meeting next Tuesday at 7 p.m. You're required to attend. We'll be voting on new bylaws regarding structures over 20 feet in height." "Required?" I raised an eyebrow. "I'm not a member of your HOA, Patricia." "We'll see about that," she said, and then she turned and walked away, her white tennis shoes crunching on my gravel driveway. I stood there for a long moment, watching her retreat, feeling the weight of what was coming settle on my shoulders. I had dealt with difficult people before, but something about Patricia's confidence worried me. She wasn't the type to make threats she couldn't back up. I spent the rest of the weekend digging through my property records, reviewing my survey documents, and making calls to my lawyer. James Whitmore had handled the purchase of my property, and he had always been straight with me. "Carter, he said when I finally got him on the phone Monday morning. "I'm looking at your file right now. Your survey was solid, but let me make some calls and see what the HOA is claiming." 2 days later, James called me back with news I didn't want to hear. "They've got something," he admitted. "There was an error in the original county records from 1982. Your property line was mismarked by about 20 feet. The HOA hired a surveying company out of Denver, and they're claiming that the corrected boundary puts about a third of your property, including the tower, within HOA jurisdiction." "That's impossible," I said. "I had a survey done." "Your surveyor worked off the county records, which were wrong." "Look, Carter, this is going to get messy. The HOA can petition the county to correct the official plat map. If they succeed, and if your tower ends up on what becomes HOA-governed land, they can enforce their bylaws. Can they just change property lines like that?" "If the original survey was wrong, yes. It's about correcting a historical error. But here's the thing, it doesn't change the actual ownership of the land. You still own it. The question is whether it falls under HOA jurisdiction based on the original development agreements from when this area was subdivided." I felt like I was being pulled into quicksand. So what do I do? Come to that meeting, bring your documents, and be prepared for a fight. The following Tuesday, I drove down to the Pine Ridge Community Center, a modern building with too much glass and too many decorative rocks in the landscaping. The parking lot was fuller than I expected. Apparently, word had gotten around that there was going to be drama, and the residents of Pine Ridge loved their drama almost as much as they loved their property values. Inside, the meeting room was arranged with neat rows of folding chairs facing a long table where Patricia sat with 4 other board members. I recognized a few of them. Brad Morrison, a retired dentist who spent most of his time playing golf. Susan Fletcher, who ran a successful real estate business and saw everything through the lens of home values. Derek Zhang, a software engineer who mostly seemed like he was there because his wife made him participate. And finally, Margaret O'Neill, an elderly woman who had lived in Pine Ridge since the beginning and who seemed to genuinely care about the community. I took a seat in the back row, my folder of documents on my lap. The room gradually filled up with curious neighbors, some of whom I recognized from seeing around town, others who were complete strangers. A few people nodded at me, but most avoided eye contact. Patricia called the meeting to order at precisely 7 p.m., going through the standard opening procedures, approval of previous minutes, treasury report, all the bureaucratic necessities. Then she got to the main event. "Item 7 on tonight's agenda," she announced, her voice echoing in the room. "Proposed amendment to HOA bylaws regarding vertical structures and communications equipment." She proceeded to present her case. The tower was unsightly. It emitted radiation, she claimed, though she had no evidence to support that. It created light pollution at night. It attracted lightning. It was a hazard to property values. She had charts, she had graphs, she had printed out Zillow listings showing homes in other areas with nearby cell towers and their supposedly depressed prices. When she finally finished, she looked directly at me. "Mr. Gallagher, would you like to respond?" I stood up, feeling every eye in the room turn toward me. My tower is a legally permitted structure on private property. I have FCC licensing, county building permits, and FAA clearance. It provides essential telecommunications services to rural communities throughout this region. I employ 6 people. I pay my taxes, and until last week, I was under the impression that my property was not part of this HOA. "The survey clearly shows otherwise," Patricia said smoothly. "I've reviewed my documentation with my attorney," I continued. The supposed survey error is from 1982, over 40 years ago. My property has been operated as independent land for decades. Even if there was an original mapping error, there's a strong case for adverse possession and established use. That's not how property law works, Brad Morrison interjected, leaning forward. If the boundary was wrong, it was always wrong. Mr. Gallagher, Margaret O'Neill spoke up, her voice surprisingly strong for her age. I was here when this community was founded. I remember when your property was first subdivided. It was always meant to be separate because of the water facility access. Has anyone actually verified this supposed survey error? Patricia's expression tightened slightly. We have professional documentation from a licensed surveying company. Can we see it? I asked. It's technical documentation, Susan Fletcher said. Most people wouldn't understand it. I'd like to see it anyway, I said firmly, along with the methodology they used and their comparison to the original survey. Patricia shuffled some papers. We can make that available for review through proper channels. Tonight, we're here to vote on the bylaw amendment. You're putting the cart before the horse, I said. You can't enforce HOA bylaws on property that isn't definitively part of the HOA. This needs to be resolved through the county first. The county has been notified, Patricia said. They're reviewing the matter, but as a precautionary measure, we need to have these bylaws in place. All in favor of the proposed amendment prohibiting communications towers and related equipment over 20 feet in height within HOA boundaries. 4 hands went up immediately. Patricia, Brad, Susan, Derek. Margaret kept her hand down. Motion passes 4-1, Patricia announced. Mr. Gallagher, you have 30 days to remove your tower or face daily fines of $500. The room erupted in murmurs. I stood there, feeling the anger building in my chest, but I kept my voice level. This is going to court, Patricia. You know that, right? That's your prerogative, she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But until a court says otherwise, the bylaws stand. Meeting adjourned. I left that meeting feeling like I'd been sucker punched. 30 days to remove a tower that had cost me over $200,000 to build. A tower that was the backbone of my entire business. A tower that served hundreds of customers who depended on my service. James Whitmore filed an emergency injunction the next morning. The hearing was set for 3 weeks away, which meant I was in legal limbo. Patricia wasted no time sending me a formal letter, certified mail, reiterating the 30-day deadline and the daily fines. I spent those 3 weeks gathering evidence, talking to my customers, documenting everything about my business and the essential nature of my services. I had testimonials from rural residents who had no other internet options. I had letters from the local fire department who used my tower for emergency communications. I even had a statement from a telemedicine doctor who treated elderly patients remotely, all dependent on my network. The hearing took place in Boulder County District Court on a cold Thursday morning. Judge Richard Harrison presided, a no-nonsense man in his early 60s with a reputation for cutting through legal nonsense to get to the heart of matters. Patricia showed up with her attorney, a slick guy named Vincent Marsh who wore a suit that probably cost more than my truck. James presented our case methodically. He showed the original survey, the permits, the established use of the property, the essential services argument. He demonstrated that even if there was a boundary error, the HOA was acting in bad faith by attempting to retroactively apply jurisdiction. Vincent argued that property boundaries were property boundaries. Errors needed to be corrected, and that HOAs had the right to enforce their bylaws to protect community standards and property values. Judge Harrison listened to both sides, reviewed the documents, and then sat back in his chair, his fingers steepled. "Here's what I'm seeing," he said. "There's a legitimate question about the property boundary that needs to be resolved by the county surveyor's office. That process takes time and needs to be done properly. In the meantime, Mr. Gallagher has been operating this tower legally with all appropriate permits for several years. Miss Hendricks, your HOA passed bylaws specifically targeting this tower and gave Mr. Gallagher an unreasonably short timeline to comply, which would effectively destroy his business before the boundary question is even resolved. That strikes me as punitive rather than protective." He looked at Patricia, who kept her expression carefully neutral. "I'm granting the injunction," Judge Harrison continued. "The HOA cannot enforce these bylaws or collect fines until the boundary dispute is officially resolved by the county. Both parties need to work with the county surveyor to get this sorted out properly. And I'm strongly suggesting that everyone consider mediation, because these HOA disputes tend to cost everyone more money than they're worth. Next case." I walked out of that courthouse feeling like I could breathe again, but I knew this was far from over. Patricia was standing in the hallway with Vincent, and the look she gave me was pure venom. "This isn't finished," she said quietly as I passed. "No, I suppose it isn't," I replied. The county surveyor's office moved at the speed of bureaucracy, which is to say, barely at all. They scheduled a site visit for 6 weeks out. Then they'd need to do their analysis, file their report, and update the official records if warranted. The whole process could take months. Patricia, however, wasn't interested in waiting. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing problems. Small things at first. My mail delivery became unreliable. I'd find trash dumped at the end of my driveway. Someone called in a false code violation, claiming I had unpermitted structures on my property, which resulted in a county inspector showing up unannounced. The inspector found nothing wrong, but it was harassment nonetheless. Then things escalated. One morning in late April, I woke up to find that someone had spray-painted "eyesore" in large red letters on the fence along my property line. I filed a police report, but without cameras or witnesses, there wasn't much they could do. 2 days later, I got a call from one of my employees, Marcus Chen, who maintained the tower equipment. "Carter, we've got a problem," he said. "Someone cut the power line to the tower." I drove out there immediately. Sure enough, the above-ground portion of the electrical conduit that ran from my main building to the tower had been cut, cleanly, with what looked like bolt cutters. This wasn't vandalism by random kids. This was targeted sabotage. I called the sheriff's office and they sent Deputy Ryan Torres to investigate. He was a solid guy, took the matter seriously, took photos, wrote up a detailed report. "You got any enemies?" he asked me. "Define enemies," I said, and then I told him about the HOA situation. He shook his head. "HOA disputes are the worst. Seen them get ugly before. You might want to invest in some security cameras." "Already on my list," I said. I had the power line repaired within 48 hours, and I installed a comprehensive camera system covering my property. 6 high-definition cameras with night vision, motion detection, cloud backup. It cost me $3,000, but I needed the protection. The cameras proved their worth just a week later when they caught Patricia herself, along with Brad Morrison, walking onto my property at 11 p.m., approaching the tower. They didn't do anything that night, just looked around, but the fact that they were there, trespassing, told me everything I needed to know about how far she was willing to go. I sent a copy of the footage to my attorney and filed another police report. Deputy Torres came back out. "That's trespassing clear as day," he said, watching the footage. Want to press charges? Not yet, I said. But I want it documented. Pattern of harassment. Smart, he agreed. May rolled into June and the county surveyor finally came out to do the official site survey. It took them 3 full days, setting up their equipment, taking measurements, reviewing historical records. The lead surveyor, a woman named Teresa Valdez, was professional and thorough. She didn't offer any opinions, just collected her data and said they'd have a report within a month. During this time, Patricia ramped up her campaign against me in other ways. She started a petition among HOA members to pressure the county commissioners to revoke my tower permits. She wrote letters to the editor of the local newspaper, claiming I was operating an industrial facility in a residential area. She even tried to get my business license challenged at the town council meeting. None of it worked, but it was exhausting. I was spending more time defending my right to exist than actually running my business. My stress levels were through the roof. I wasn't sleeping well, and I was starting to understand how these HOA situations broke people down. Then, in mid-July, everything changed. I got a call from Teresa Valdez. "Mr. Gallagher, I wanted to give you a heads up before the official report comes out. Our survey confirms that your property boundaries are exactly where your original survey showed them to be. The HOA's surveyor made several errors in their methodology. They used the wrong benchmark reference points and miscalculated the elevation adjustments. Your tower is entirely on your private property, which is not part of the HOA jurisdiction." I felt relief wash over me like a wave. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely certain." "The official report will be filed with the county recorder's office tomorrow. You should receive a certified copy within a week." I thanked her profusely and immediately called James. He was elated. "This is perfect. Complete vindication. I'll file a motion to dismiss the HOA's claims, and we can discuss whether you want to pursue damages for harassment." When the official report came out, I expected Patricia to back down. I should have known better. Instead, she doubled down. At the next HOA meeting, which I attended with my attorney, she claimed the county survey was biased, that I had somehow influenced the results, that she was going to hire another surveyor to dispute the findings. "Patricia," Margaret O'Neill said wearily, "enough. The county has spoken. We lost." "Let it go." "I will not let it go," Patricia snapped. "That tower is destroying our community's character. What it's doing is providing a service." Derek Zhang spoke up, surprising everyone. "My mother lives 10 miles from here in a rural area. She depends on Carter's network for her internet. She's diabetic and uses a remote monitoring system. Without his service, she'd have nothing. This crusade of yours has gone too far." "I agree," Susan Fletcher added. "We've spent over $20,000 in legal fees on this, money that could have gone to community improvements. The survey is clear. We need to accept it and move on." Patricia looked around the table, seeing that she'd lost her support, and her face flushed red. "Fine, but don't come crying to me when your property values tank." She stood up and walked out of her own meeting. Brad Morrison awkwardly took over and they finished the remaining agenda items. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 3 days later, I woke up to find my water wasn't working. Not just low pressure, completely off. I checked my well pump, thinking it might have failed, but everything was operating normally. Then I realized the issue wasn't my well. The issue was the water line that connected to the treatment facility. I drove my ATV out to the access road that ran through my property to the water treatment facility, and what I found made my blood boil. Someone had installed a locked gate across the access road, right at the point where it crossed onto my property from the HOA common area. The gate was heavy-duty steel padlocked, with a sign that read, "Private HOA property." No trespassing. This was a problem for multiple reasons. First, while the road crossed my land, it served the water treatment facility that provided water to the entire Pine Ridge community. Second, I had easement rights that guaranteed access. Third, and most importantly, blocking access to a public utility facility was illegal. I called the county water department. They sent out a supervisor named Tom Brennan, a gruff man in his 50s who had been managing water systems for 3 decades. "Who the hell put up this gate?" he demanded when he saw it. "I'm guessing the HOA president," I said. "Do they understand this serves 200 homes? We need access for maintenance, monitoring, chemical delivery. You can't just lock out a water facility." "I don't think she cares," I said. Tom made some calls on his radio, and within an hour the county had cut the lock and removed the gate. But the message was clear. Patricia was escalating to infrastructure warfare. That evening, I got a certified letter from the HOA attorney. It claimed that the access road was actually on HOA property, not mine, and that I had no right to use it. It demanded that I stop using the road immediately and stated that the HOA would be installing permanent barriers to prevent unauthorized access. I called James immediately. "Can they do this?" "Let me look at your easement documents," he said. I could hear him typing. "Okay, here's the situation. When your property was originally developed, the access easement was granted in perpetuity for the purpose of accessing the water treatment facility. That easement runs with the land, meaning it transfers with ownership and can't be revoked. The HOA can't just block it. So what do I do? I'll file for another injunction. But Carter, this is getting dangerous. She's messing with public utilities now. That's a different level of legal trouble." The next morning, before James could even file the paperwork, I drove out to check on the situation and found that Patricia had escalated even further. The gate was back, heavier and stronger than before, and this time it was set in concrete footings. But that wasn't the worst part. She had also installed a second gate on what she claimed was HOA property, further down the access road, completely boxing in the water treatment facility. Tom Brennan was already there, along with 2 sheriff's deputies, and he was absolutely furious. "This is criminal," he was saying to one of the deputies. "That facility needs daily monitoring. We've got chemical feed systems, filtration equipment, pumps. You can't just lock everyone out." "We're trying to reach the HOA president," the deputy said. "She's not answering her phone," Tom said. "I've called 6 times. I watched as Tom made the decision in real time. "Cut the locks, both gates. This is a public safety issue. We'll deal with the legal fallout later." The deputies cut through both gates with bolt cutters while Tom and I watched. Once they had access, Tom drove his truck through to the facility to check on the systems. I followed him in my ATV. The facility itself was relatively simple. A building about the size of a large garage containing filtration equipment, storage tanks, chemical feed systems, and monitoring equipment. It drew water from a deep well and processed it for the community. "Everything looks okay for now," Tom said, checking the gauges and systems. "But if she'd left this locked for another day or 2, we would have had serious problems. Chemical feed would have run out. The automated systems need manual oversight. This is incredibly dangerous and incredibly illegal." "What happens now?" I asked. "I'm reporting this to the county commissioners and the district attorney's office. You can't interfere with water utility operations. Period. She's going to face consequences." I drove back to my house, my mind racing. Patricia had crossed a line from harassment into actual criminal behavior. But I also knew that these government processes could take time, and in the meantime, she was clearly willing to do whatever it took to hurt me. That's when I had a realization that changed everything. The access road to the water treatment facility crossed my property. My private property. The easement granted access for the purpose of maintaining the facility, but it didn't specify who had that access or under what conditions. And critically, the easement ran through my land. I controlled the access. If Patricia wanted to play games with gates and access, two could play that game. I spent the rest of that day reviewing my property documents, the easement agreements, and consulting with James on the phone for over 2 hours. Technically, James said carefully, you have the right to control access to your private property, including that road, as long as you don't interfere with the legitimate use of the easement for its stated purpose. Which is maintaining the water facility, I said. Correct. So the county water department would have guaranteed access. But the HOA members, they're not the water department. They're just residents who benefit from the facility. So if I were to install my own gate, I said slowly, and provide access to county personnel but not to random HOA members, that would be within my rights. It would be legally defensible, James said. But Carter, think about what you're doing. This is going to escalate the situation even further. She tried to lock me out of essential utilities, I said. She's breaking the law and putting public safety at risk. Someone needs to make her understand there are consequences. Just be very careful about how you do this, James warned. Document everything. Make sure the county has access. Don't do anything that could be construed as retaliation or interference with utility operations. I spent the next day planning. I contacted Tom Brennan and explained what I wanted to do. He was surprisingly supportive. Look, I get it, he said. She's made my job hell for the past 2 weeks. I've had to cut locks 3 times now. She keeps replacing them. If you want to install your own gate and control access to your property, that's your right. As long as my guys can get through to maintain the facility, I've got no problem with it. I'll give you a key and the access code, I said. Your people will have 24/7 access, no restrictions. Then do what you need to do, he said. The next morning, I hired a fencing company. They installed a heavy-duty gate system at the point where the access road entered my property from the public road. This was well before the HOA common area, on undisputedly my own land. It was a professional installation, 12-foot steel gate, electric operator, keypad access, backup battery system. I had signs made. Private property. Authorized access only. County Water Department personnel accepted. I gave access codes to Tom and his entire maintenance crew. I gave one to the sheriff's department for emergency access, but I didn't give one to the HOA. The gate was operational by 3 p.m. on a Thursday. By 4 p.m., my phone was ringing off the hook. Patricia called me 7 times. I didn't answer. Then Brad Morrison called. Then Susan Fletcher. Then I started getting calls from random HOA members, whose numbers I didn't even recognize. Finally, around 6 p.m., Patricia showed up at my gate in her white Mercedes SUV. I watched her on my security cameras as she tried the gate, found it locked, and started pounding on the keypad. Then she started pounding on the gate itself. I drove down in my truck and stopped on my side of the gate. I rolled down my window. "What's the meaning of this?" she demanded. "Private property, Patricia. The sign is pretty clear. You can't block access to the water facility." I'm not blocking access. The county water department has full access, 24/7. In fact, they specifically requested that I help them secure the area because someone keeps installing illegal gates and interfering with utility operations. Her face went red. Those gates were to protect HOA property. Those gates were illegal, and you know it. Tom Brennan has filed a complaint with the district attorney, but that's between you and the county. This gate is on my property, securing my property. We need to access the facility for HOA business, she said. What HOA business do you have at a county-operated water treatment facility? She sputtered. We oversee it. We coordinate with the county. We have a right to monitor the operations that serve our community. Do you have any official capacity with the county water department? I asked. That's not the point. Actually, that's exactly the point. You're residents who benefit from the facility. You're not operators, you're not maintenance personnel, you have no official role. The facility is managed by the county. If you have concerns about its operation, take them up with Tom Brennan during normal business hours. You can't do this, she said, her voice rising. This is extortion. This is retaliation. This is me controlling access to my private property, which is my legal right. The easement guarantees access for utility purposes. It doesn't give random people the right to drive across my land whenever they feel like it. I'll have you arrested, she threatened. For what? Installing a gate on my own property. Good luck with that. The sheriff's department already has the access code. They approved the installation. I could see her shaking with rage. You're going to regret this. Maybe, I said. But I already regretted the past 6 months of harassment, vandalism, illegal gates, and your attempts to destroy my business. At least now we're on even footing. You want access. The county has it. You want to play games, find someone else to play with. I rolled up my window and drove back to my house, watching in my rearview mirror as she stood there, furious and helpless. The fallout was immediate and intense. Within 2 hours, I had an angry email from Vincent Marsh threatening legal action. I forwarded it to James, who responded with a detailed letter explaining property rights, easement law, and pointing out that his client had attempted to interfere with county utility operations multiple times. The next morning, I had protesters at my gate. About 15 HOA residents, holding signs about water access and property rights. It would have been more intimidating if they weren't all standing on the public road, unable to actually do anything. Deputy Torres showed up to make sure things stayed peaceful. Quite the situation you've got here, he said to me. Didn't start it, I replied. Just finished it. Fair enough. The DA is reviewing the complaints about the water facility interference. Between you and me, Mrs. Hendricks is in serious trouble. You can't mess with public utilities. The protest lasted about 3 hours before people got bored and went home, but the political pressure continued. Patricia organized a petition demanding the county force me to provide unrestricted access. She showed up at the county commissioners' meeting to complain. She wrote more letters to the newspaper. None of it worked because the law was clear. I had the right to control access to my property as long as I wasn't interfering with the legitimate use of the easement. The county water department had access. That was all that was legally required. Tom Brennan even wrote a letter supporting my position, stating that my gate had actually improved security at the facility and reduced the incidence of unauthorized interference. Things stayed tense but stable for about a week. Then, Patricia made another critical mistake. She organized what she called a community access action. Basically, she gathered about 20 HOA members and, at a predetermined time, they all drove to my gate simultaneously. Her plan seemed to be to overwhelm the single access point, force it open through numbers, and drive through to the water facility to assert some kind of symbolic control. It was idiotic and it was illegal, and I had it all on camera. I called 911 immediately. I've got about 20 people attempting to force entry through a locked gate onto my private property. 3 sheriff's vehicles responded within 10 minutes. By the time they arrived, Patricia and her group had already damaged the gate mechanism trying to force it open. Deputy Torres took charge of the scene. "Folks, you need to disperse now," he announced. "You're on private property without permission and you've damaged property. Leave now or face arrest for criminal trespass and vandalism." Most people left immediately. Patricia didn't. "This is public access to a public utility," she insisted. "We have a right to be here." "Madam, this is private property," Deputy Torres said patiently. "The easement provides access for utility operations, not for residents. You need to leave." "I'm not leaving until we can access the water facility." "Then you're under arrest for criminal trespass," he said, and he pulled out his handcuffs. The look on Patricia's face was priceless. Shock, outrage, disbelief. "You can't arrest me. I'm the HOA president." "That's not a legal status that exempts you from trespassing laws," he said, and he cuffed her and put her in the back of his patrol car. 2 other HOA members who refused to leave were also arrested. The rest of the crowd dispersed quickly. I gave Deputy Torres the security footage showing the entire incident, including the deliberate damage to my gate. He took statements from everyone involved. Patricia was released on bond that evening, but she was facing multiple charges: criminal trespass, vandalism, criminal mischief, and the district attorney was still reviewing the water utility interference complaints. The HOA held an emergency meeting 3 days later. I wasn't invited, but I heard about it from multiple sources. Brad Morrison, Susan Fletcher, and Derek Zhang all voted to remove Patricia as president, citing her illegal actions and the financial liability she was creating for the association. Margaret O'Neill abstained, saying she was just sad it had come to this. Patricia was removed from the board by a vote of 3-1. Susan Fletcher took over as president temporarily. Susan called me 2 days after that. "Mr. Gallagher, I'd like to meet with you and discuss how we can resolve this situation. Would you be willing to sit down?" I met her at a coffee shop in Pine Ridge, neutral territory. She came alone, no attorney, and she looked tired. "I want to apologize," she said. "Patricia went way too far. What happened to you was wrong. The HOA had no business trying to claim jurisdiction over your property, and the harassment and interference with your business was inexcusable." "I appreciate that," I said. "I'm hoping we can come to some kind of understanding," she continued. "You have every right to maintain that gate on your property, but it's causing some legitimate issues. Some of our residents feel like they've lost oversight of the water facility. They're worried about water quality and maintenance." "Those are valid concerns," I acknowledged. "But they should be directed to the county water department, not me. I'm not the operator." "I understand, but would you be willing to consider allowing scheduled access for HOA representatives to observe operations? Maybe once a month, coordinated with Tom Brennan, just so residents feel like they have some connection to what's happening with their water supply." I thought about it. "I'll consider it, but only if the HOA agrees to a few things. First, a formal written apology and retraction of all claims to my property. Second, payment for damages to my fence, power lines, and gate, plus my legal fees. Third, a binding agreement that the HOA will never again attempt to assert jurisdiction over my property or interfere with my business operations." She nodded slowly. "I think I can get the board to agree to that. Can I get a dollar amount for the damages?" I pulled out a folder with itemized invoices. Repairs to vandalism and the gate damage, $8,400. Legal fees through last week, $23,600. Total of $32,000. She winced but didn't argue. "I'll present this to the board." "Give me a week. Take 2, I said. "I'm not in a hurry anymore." True to her word, Susan came back 2 weeks later with a formal settlement agreement. The HOA would pay the full damages plus legal fees. They issued a written statement acknowledging that my property was not under HOA jurisdiction. They agreed never to interfere with my business operations. And in exchange, I agreed to grant supervised access to the water facility 1 day per month for HOA representatives, coordinated through the county water department. James reviewed the agreement and gave his approval. I signed it. Susan signed it on behalf of the HOA board. We had it notarized and filed with the county. Patricia's criminal charges proceeded through the court system. She ended up pleading guilty to reduced charges, criminal mischief, and interference with utility operations. She got 6 months probation, community service, and a $2,000 fine. More importantly, she was banned from serving on the HOA board for 5 years. The district attorney also made it clear that any future interference with the water facility would result in much more serious charges. Tom Brennan changed all the locks and access codes at the facility and issued new credentials only to county personnel and me. Life gradually returned to normal. My business continued operating without interference. The HOA got new leadership that was actually reasonable. I even developed a decent working relationship with Susan Fletcher and Derek Zhang. About 6 months after everything settled, I was doing routine maintenance on my tower when Margaret O'Neill drove up my driveway. I climbed down to meet her. "Hope I'm not intruding," she said. "Not at all." "What can I do for you?" "I wanted to thank you," she said. Patricia needed to be stopped. She was turning our community into a police state. The HOA was supposed to maintain common areas and coordinate on community issues, not wage war against property owners. "What happened to you was wrong, and I'm sorry I didn't speak up more forcefully sooner." "I appreciate that," I said. "Honestly, I never wanted any of this conflict. I just wanted to run my business in peace." "I know, and for what it's worth, several of us have looked into your service. My grandson signed up last month. He lives about 15 miles north of here, too far for cable. Your internet has been a godsend for him." "That's what I'm here for," I said. "Serving the people that the big companies forget about," she smiled. "Keep doing what you're doing. And if you ever have any more HOA troubles, you let me know. I've lived here 40 years. I know where all the bodies are buried, metaphorically speaking." I laughed. "I'll keep that in mind." She patted my arm and drove away. I stood there in my driveway, looking up at my tower standing tall against the Colorado sky, red and white bands gleaming in the afternoon sun. It had cost me 6 months of stress, over $30,000 in legal fees, and God knows how many sleepless nights. But it was still standing. My business was still operating, and I had learned an important lesson about standing up to bullies, even when they come armed with HOA bylaws and lawyers. 3 months after that, I ran into Patricia at the grocery store in Pine Ridge. It was unavoidable, a chance encounter in the produce section. She saw me, and for a moment I thought she might just turn and walk away. Instead, she approached. "Carter," she said stiffly. "Patricia." We stood there in awkward silence for a moment. Then, to my surprise, she spoke quietly. "I was wrong about all of it. I let my desire for control and perfect property values turn me into someone I'm not proud of. I'm in therapy now, working through some things." "That's good," I said, not sure what else to say. "I can't undo what happened. I can't give you back those months of stress, but I am genuinely sorry." "For what it's worth." I studied her face and saw something I hadn't seen before, actual humility. "I appreciate you saying that. It takes courage to admit you were wrong." She nodded and walked away. I watched her go, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Anger at what she'd put me through, but also a kind of peace knowing it was truly over. As I drove home that evening, past the well-maintained homes of Pine Ridge, past the community center where so many contentious meetings had taken place, and finally onto my own 5 acres of freedom. I reflected on everything that had happened. The HOA had tried to take my livelihood. They'd harassed me, vandalized my property, and attempted to interfere with essential utilities. And I'd responded by asserting my legal rights, controlling my own property, and ultimately forcing them to face consequences for their illegal actions. Some people might say I was petty for installing that gate. Maybe they're right, but sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. Sometimes you have to make people understand that actions have consequences. And sometimes the only way to deal with a bully is to show them you're not afraid to push back. My communications tower still stands on my property, serving hundreds of rural customers who depend on reliable internet and cell service. My business employs 8 people now, up from 6 when this all started. I've expanded my coverage area and invested in new equipment. The gate at the entrance to my property remains, though now it's more of a formality than a necessity. The county water department has full access. The monthly HOA observation visits happen like clockwork, usually with Derek Zhang representing the board. He's actually interested in the water treatment process and asks good questions. Tom Brennan and I have become friends. We get lunch about once a month, and he tells me stories about dealing with difficult residents and bureaucratic nightmares. He still thanks me for helping secure the water facility and dealing with the Patricia situation. Deputy Torres stops by occasionally, usually just to chat. He says the Pine Ridge HOA disputes have dropped dramatically since the leadership change. Apparently, Susan Fletcher runs meetings efficiently, focuses on actual community needs rather than personal vendettas, and encourages residents to resolve neighbor disputes through conversation rather than legal threats. The most unexpected outcome came about a year after everything settled. A neighboring community about 20 miles away was dealing with their own tyrannical HOA situation. They reached out to me, asking for advice and potential legal references. I connected them with James Whitmore and shared my experience. They used similar strategies to push back against overreach and ultimately reformed their own HOA board. James joked that I should start a consulting business, HOA defense strategies. I declined, but I did start documenting my experience in detail, including all the legal documents, strategies that worked, and mistakes I made along the way. I posted it all online, hoping it might help other property owners dealing with similar situations. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of people reached out with their own HOA horror stories. People losing their homes over minor violations. Elderly residents being fined into poverty. Small business owners driven out by discriminatory bylaws. The more I learned, the more I realized Patricia wasn't an aberration. She was just one example of what happens when people get a little bit of power and zero accountability. I started working with a state legislator who was interested in HOA reform. We drafted legislation that would require HOAs to follow stricter due process procedures, limit their fine authority, and create easier appeals processes for homeowners. It's slow work, but it's important. Looking back now, almost 2 years after Patricia first marched across my lawn with that look on her face, I can see how much has changed. My business is thriving. My property is secure. My legal rights are clearly established and documented. And I've become an accidental advocate for property rights and reasonable governance. The communications tower that started all this still hums with activity 24 hours a day, routing calls, delivering internet, providing essential connectivity to rural Colorado. Every time I look at it, I remember what I fought for and why it mattered. Not just for me and my business, but for all the people who depend on that service. Sometimes, late at night when I'm up on the tower doing maintenance, I can see the lights of Pine Ridge spread out below me. 200 homes full of families living their lives. Most of them never knew about the battle that took place over property lines and access roads and that tower beneath my feet. They just know their water works, their internet functions, and their HOA no longer behaves like a miniature authoritarian regime. That's enough for me. The gate at the entrance to my property opens and closes dozens of times a month now. County water personnel, my employees, delivery drivers with the access code, occasional authorized visitors. It's become part of the landscape, part of the infrastructure that makes this place work. But it's also a reminder that boundaries matter, that property rights matter, and that standing up for those rights, even when it's difficult and expensive and stressful, is sometimes absolutely necessary. I never wanted to be the guy who fought the HOA. I just wanted to run my business and be left alone. But when pushed, I pushed back, and in the end, justice actually prevailed. The bad actor faced consequences. The legal system, despite its slowness, ultimately worked. And a small community became a little bit better governed, a little bit more reasonable, a little bit more just, my phone rings. It's a customer about 30 miles away reporting an outage. I grab my equipment bag and head out. This is what I do. This is what I fought to keep doing. And as I drive past that gate, my gate on my property, I feel grateful for every day that I get to continue this work, free from harassment, secure in my rights, and ready for whatever comes next. The HOA tried to shut me down. They failed. They tried to take my property. They failed. They tried to interfere with essential utilities. They failed spectacularly and faced criminal charges. And in the end, they learned what I knew all along. You can't run a community through intimidation and overreach. You can't destroy people's livelihoods because you don't like how something looks. And you absolutely cannot interfere with public utilities because you're on a power trip. Patricia Hendricks learned these lessons the hard way. So did the HOA board that enabled her. So did the residents who participated in that ridiculous community access action that resulted in arrests. As for me, I learned that sometimes you have to be willing to fight, even when it's exhausting. Sometimes you have to be strategic and tactical. Sometimes you have to use every legal tool at your disposal. And sometimes, just sometimes, you have to install a gate and cut off access to make a point about who really owns what. The water treatment facility still operates smoothly, maintained by professionals, secured against interference, accessible to those who need access, and closed to those who want to cause trouble. The HOA gets their monthly observation visits. Tom and his crew have everything they need. And I have my property, my business, and my peace of mind. It's been a long journey from that first confrontation to where I am now, but I'd make the same choices again. When someone tries to take away your livelihood, you fight back. When someone harasses and vandalizes your property, you document and prosecute. When someone plays games with infrastructure access, you show them what real access control looks like. And when someone crosses legal and ethical lines, you make sure they face consequences. That's not revenge. That's justice. That's accountability. That's standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. The sun is setting over the Colorado foothills as I drive back from fixing the customer's outage. The tower is silhouetted against the orange and pink sky, a monument to persistence, to legal rights defended, to battles won. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new customers, new maintenance issues. But I'll face them from a position of security. knowing my rights are established, my property is protected, and no HOA president with a God complex can take that away. And if another Patricia Hendricks ever shows up at my gate, demanding entry, threatening my business, trying to extend their authority where it doesn't belong, I'll be ready. I'll be calm, I'll be legal, and I'll be absolutely unmovable, because this is my property. This is my business. This is my life, and I defended it successfully once. I can do it again if necessary, but I don't think it will be necessary. Word gets around. People know what happened here, and they know that property rights, when vigorously defended, tend to win out in the end. The gate closes behind me as I return home, electric motor humming, locks engaging. On my property, on my terms, operating my business in peace. Exactly as it should be.